Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, hello, hello. I'm so happy to have those of you that are already hopping on this morning here in East Coast time. We are both actually in Florida, Jennifer and I, which is really, really cool. So thank you so much for already hopping on and showing your support to Jennifer and the Her Version community. As you know, Her Version is a platform built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I am speaking with an amazing woman, as I said, named Jennifer Silliman. Jennifer is an advocate for women who have or are suffering from postpartum and is a firm believer in creating community around the subject in order to educate more women. She is the creator of Dark Side of the Full Moon, which is both a film and a podcast that delves into the unseen world of maternal mental health in the United States. She is here to share her own story and also give hope to those that are suffering and those that feel the guilt of the past postpartum feelings. We are excited to learn more and are so grateful for the time she's giving us today. Welcome, Jennifer. What are the rules as far as that? Because that was one of my biggest issues, was admitting the intrusive thoughts. If
Yeah.
somebody does say something like that, are we right in feeling that we could be locked up in a loony bin? Like, how does that even work?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, here's a good because a lot of moms would be like, "Well, how do I know I'm having intrusive thoughts and I'm not having postpartum psychosis?" Which most people know the story of Andrea Yates, who, unfortunately drowned her 5 children and had postpartum psychosis. She had auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations, the voices telling her to save her children basically by taking their life. Um, and so when I was having intrusive thoughts, I was like, oh no, like, is that gonna happen? Like, am I gonna do these things that I'm thinking about? If you feel bad about them, like I was having them and crying, like hysterically, like I would never hurt a fly. Like, why am I having these thoughts? Like, I'm a very nice, gentle person. If you're feeling bad about them, they're likely intrusive thoughts. If you, and same with suicidal ideation. So you might go to the doctor and be like, I'm having thoughts of hurting myself. Well, typically, or the first thing they should ask you is, how are you going to do it? So anyone who's taking a
Wow.
suicide training or a mental health first aid training, which I've taken millions of them, people are so scared to talk about suicide, especially with somebody who they might think is suicidal. But really, that's the best thing you can do, is just ask them flat out, how are you going to do it? And if they think they're going to do it, they will tell you. And if they
Wow.
have a plan, that's serious. And I didn't have a plan. Well, I kind of had a plan, but I couldn't go forward with the plan because logistically I couldn't do it. It's very weird because my whole intrusive thought thing was around sharp objects. So I couldn't use scissors, I couldn't use knives, I couldn't even touch them without feeling like I was going to pass out.
Wow.
And so I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to pull my car in the garage, turn it on, put the windows down, and just fall asleep. Well, we lived in a townhouse with a 1-car garage, but it was filled with stuff. We never parked in it. And thank God, because I think if I could have pulled my car in there, there was maybe a good opportunity that I would have tried to do it.
Wow.
And so, asking that person, and that's what essentially a doctor should ask. But, a lot of doctors' office don't even have a protocol, for someone who comes into their office suicidal. And it doesn't have to be a mom. I mean, it could just be anyone who's, manic depressive and wanting to take their life and make a doctor's appointment. Well, what does that office do? And I have had local doctor offices here call me because they've seen the film and call me and say, I have a mom here who claims that she is thinking about hurting herself. What should I do? And I'm just like, how do you run your office? Like, what is your protocol? You should probably call their emergency contact, which is asked on every single form that you fill out at the doctor's office. Have them come in, and then likely you should either call 211, which is crisis intervention in most places, or 911 if it's an emergency. And then you cross your fingers and you hope that the staff in the emergency room knows how to take care of this mom. That's still a piece that needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting having this conversation because it helps, but then it still kind of like doesn't help because it's like you're still stuck. Like I think of myself back then and all of those insane thoughts I was having, but you do kind of have to go in and sugarcoat it if you do go in, because I was fine. Like nothing happened, but like, how do you know that? So it's like, which one do you choose? Because what if it really isn't fine? And then we're like, don't tell them because you're going to go in the loony bin. But what if you really need to go in the loony bin?
Right. What if you need inpatient treatment?
Like help, go get help, like real help. Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
No. It's
but then my situation, I somehow made it out fine. I just did a Facebook post a few weeks ago. My son just turned 18. And the first 2 lines were, my son just turned 18. And I don't know how we got here. Like, we should both be dead. And it was a whole post basically surrounding around postpartum and how, like, I don't even know how I did this. I don't even know how I didn't kill myself or kill my child, because the thoughts were so strong. So this is tough. This is really tough. And I guess the only answer is having podcasts like this, which you're running a podcast. Can you talk about your podcast?
Yeah, sure. So the podcast is the same name as the film, Dark Side of the Full Moon. And I do have a lot of moms that come on and share their stories. I also have physicians that come on and kind of talk about the piece that we just talked about. Wow. But again, I mean, these physicians that are trained in this are found in pockets. It's not a mandatory training. It's not a training that everybody gets. More and more practitioners are finally getting into that maternal mental health kind of world and understanding that mental health is a huge part of being pregnant and during the postpartum period. So the podcast, if we're talking about something that could be triggering, there's always a trigger warning before the episode. But it's important for families and moms to kind of know what can happen. I didn't even know this could happen. Like, I had no idea. And I had like every risk factor for it to happen, which it makes complete sense that it did. And I think it's important for women to kind of know their risk factors. Do you have a lot of stuff going on in your life right now? I mean, I really don't know anyone that doesn't. So I think we all probably have that risk factor going into it, right? Yeah. Are you having a C-section instead of a C-section is a huge risk factor for a mood and anxiety disorder. Do you have a history of mental illness in your family, even if you're not the one who's diagnosed? Do you suffer yourself? That's a huge risk factor. Do you have a support system? Do you have a partner? Are you a single mom who's going home after you have this baby and you're the sole provider? You are it financially, emotionally, physically to keep this child alive, it is all on your shoulders. Those are things that need to be addressed, I think, even by a doctor when a mom is in an office, to kind of know her whole kind of situation. And I think, and every mom will probably tell you this, it's all about the baby. It is like we're here as the vessel, but it's mainly about the health of the baby, especially once baby's out. It's like if mom lived during the birth, everything's fine. It's just like, no, it's not. Like, that's not okay.
Wow.
And so you'll hear all kinds of stories on the podcast, everything from birth trauma, which is huge. Trauma is a huge thing that's finally starting to be addressed in many different circles. But trauma and, having birth plans are such a big thing. And I think it's a great idea, but when birth plans don't go as planned, it's a huge risk factor for a mom to fall into a deep depression, thinking she failed her child because she couldn't even stick to the plan.
Wow.
Breastfeeding issues, I can't breastfeed. I must be a terrible mom. I can't feed my baby. What's wrong with me? And so these are the kinds of things that when they're presented in a childbirth class, they should be presented in a way that doesn't force one sort of decision as the good one and then the one that's the bad one. Because when we start doing that, if everything doesn't work out perfectly for this mom, she's automatically going to think this is the bad one. And now what, maybe I shouldn't have been a mom, or whatever the case may be. So it's just so important for moms to just have that open mind, be flexible, and educate yourself as much as you possibly can, especially about mood disorders. And one of the great ways to do that is just to listen to other stories of moms, textbooks and childbirth books and what to expect when expecting. I mean, those books are great. But talk to other moms, listen to their stories, especially to your friends that you trust, who are likely not going to sugarcoat anything, hopefully, and kind of tell you the real deal. And it's not about scaring people. It's about preparing people. And when you prepare somebody for something that might happen, they can handle it a lot better. Yeah. And that's really what it's all about. And that's kind of what the podcast does.
Yeah. So it's called, I wrote it down here. Is this right? Dark Side
of the Full Moon.
Of the Full Moon.
Yeah. Dark Side.
And then can they, Dark Side of, I know it's on your website, right?
Yes.
They can just go to your website. Mm-hmm. So Jennifer's website is right above her face area.
Yep. JenniferSilliman.com. I have 2 podcasts. So yes, the link to Dark Side of the Full Moon is on there.
That's awesome. I love what you are doing. It's fantastic. I do want to ask, just in life, in general, what is one of the biggest challenges that you've gone through? Is this one of the biggest challenges, or is there other?
There is one other challenge, and that is coincided with going off my medication, and my daughter got diagnosed with autism right at the same time.
Wow.
So it was like a collision in 2011. That was just like, are you kidding me? I just got through this whole thing with myself, educating myself on mood and anxiety disorders, like trying to figure that all out. And then our daughter Allison got diagnosed with autism, which was something I didn't know about, right? I mean, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that meant. And so my husband and I went on a journey of reading every book we could and talking to people that were, going through the same thing. And, so I dedicate myself equally between those kind of 2 causes. Really, kind of just taking care of myself and supporting myself more so than being an advocate. I mean, I'm an advocate for, special needs families, but for me, I'm kind of on the other side of it where I need the support and I need the education on what this is and what this means for our family. I think that, that was a big thing for us, was that my vision going back to motherhood is now completely different. She'll always live with us. She won't be independent. What does that look like for me and my husband? What does that look like financially? What does that look like? And all those typical things that you think about as a mom, especially a mom of a girl, those things are likely not going to happen. And so mourning that was a whole other piece as well, because it was just, it's just a tough thing. But
How old was she when she got diagnosed?
She was 2.
Wow.
Yeah, it was early. I knew something wasn't right. My pediatrician tried to talk me out of it, but I knew something wasn't right. And so she got her official diagnosis when she was about 2.5, but we started treatments at 2. And
aren't girls usually not found to be autistic until way later?
That's so interesting that you say that, because that's not true. Okay. And it's not true because the tests that speech therapists and child psychologists use are geared towards boys. And so what they think is happening is that girls are being screened, but they're falling through the cracks because the screen just isn't geared towards females. So, and the screen is standard for like every child. So it's just like, so they think a lot of girls are just missed, like they're not being diagnosed. And that's, I think, still happening today. I mean, my daughter's only 2 girls in my daughter's class. And I think out of the entire school, there's probably only like maybe 20 out of 100 or 300 students. So her psychiatrist, my daughter's psychologist, actually was the one who shared that information with me. She goes, I really don't think it's a matter of boys are more prevalent. That's more prevalent in boys. It's that the girls are just not being screened properly. So it's interesting, but she's a wonderful girl. I mean, she's just amazing. She's an amazing child. And had she not been diagnosed with autism, by the way, the film would have never been made, because my co-producer, and this is all in the film, so if anyone watches it, how we met, my co-producer, Maureen, who I met for the very first time, came to my house to film my daughter for an autism training video. And that's how we met. She turned the camera on me and was like, hey, tell me a little about yourself, being a mom, to a special needs child, and blah, 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 blah. And so I did. And she's like, oh, you're so good on camera. And I said, oh, well, I went to school for broadcasting. I've done television stuff before. I love being in front of the camera and public speaking and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I run support groups for moms who have suffered with a mood and anxiety disorder. And she's like, oh my gosh, I suffered while I was pregnant and I've always wanted to make a film. And literally the next week she was at my house and we had totally timelined and storyboarded the entire film. And that's how it happened. So it was serendipitous, right? I mean,
wow.
It's really incredible.
I mean, that is such a story of being open. You know, like when you're talking about your stuff and sharing your story, these are the things that come together so easily. I love that. People don't necessarily realize that.
I share my story with everybody. I should just carry a billboard around, but I do, because you never know. And this has happened to me many a times. I mean, where I have said something, it happened actually at a hotel bar in Washington, D.C. I was on a conference for my job at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. And it had been a really long day. And I went to the bar and there was an older woman sitting beside me. And we just got to chatting. And I don't know how we got on the topic. I find any way to really talk about it. And I was like, oh, I did a documentary film about postpartum depression. And she looked at me and she's like, my daughter just had a baby 2 weeks ago. That's why I'm here visiting her. And I know something's not right. And so she's like, how should I talk to my daughter? And so I gave her the whole thing. She went the next day to visit with her daughter. And it turned out her daughter was suffering and no one had ever asked her if she was having scary thoughts or not sleeping well or anything. Her daughter was just putting on a pretty face, which we're very good at, right? And just pretending that everything is great. And her mom just knew something wasn't right. And the next day I met her again at the bar, and she told me the whole thing. She's like, this is like some sort of, she called them God winks, right? You know, this happened for a reason. And I was supposed to be at this bar sitting beside you, so I would have that, you know, open up that conversation with my daughter. So yeah, I share it in hotel bars, like everywhere. Everywhere it just comes up. Because you never know who's sitting beside you and who needs to hear it. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So besides the podcast, can you let us know what else you do for business?
Yeah, so I work for Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies of Palm Beach County. I run their Teen Mom Mentoring program. It's a great program we have here for teens in high school who are pregnant or parenting, and we connect them with a mentor. And our outcome is that we want them to graduate with a diploma. So that's really the, you know, the bare minimum of it. There's so much more obviously that goes into it, but our mentors are, you know, just working women or retired women who've had a child and want to give back. And it's a really unique and just really neat thing to see, especially when they walk. You know, we're getting ready, graduation's coming up in May, and we have 13 girls graduating out of our program. Most of the others are moving on to the next grade level. So, you know, it's incredible to see the relationships that the girls make with each other as well. They're just so supportive of one another. You know, it's hard being a teen parent. It's hard being a teen. So, you know, being a parent on top of that and being in school, and yeah, there's just a lot of things too. But the mentors, you know, that's why we connect them, because they need that extra support. So,
yeah, definitely. I love what you do. It's all in the realm.
That's what I do to make a paycheck. Because the podcast doesn't bring in a lot of income. None, actually, to be exact. But I like it. And I started another podcast recently called Hearts of Stars, where I interview a lot of celebrities and talk to them about, you know, things that are near and dear to their heart. I'm actually interviewing 2 actresses tomorrow, one of which did suffer with postpartum anxiety. So we're going to talk about that. And yeah, so it's just all about storytelling with me. I love it. I love interviewing people, and it has been a joy today sitting on the other side and being able to share my story. So yeah, I appreciate that very much, Sabrina.
Definitely, 100%. I want to ask before we close up, what does success mean to you?
I think success to me means in whatever situation you are faced with, that you do it with authenticity, and that you're authentic to yourself and your beliefs, but also very open-minded. And I think, you know, I've gotten to a point where I'm never done learning. I'm in a constant state of just learning as much as I can about everything. I mean, it's just the growth, right? Success is continuing to grow, and not just kind of settling where you are and knowing that you don't know everything, right? And there's just so much to learn. But yeah, being authentic and just continuing to grow, I think is a good recipe to be successful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So true. Well, I so appreciate you being here. This was very insightful on many levels for me. So I appreciate that. And it kind of just lightened up a little bit of the guilt, because I've been sharing my story since my son turned 17. I never said anything about any of those feelings until that. His dad and I aren't together, the whole court system and all that nervousness. And I promised myself that as soon as my son turned 17, I would just let it rip. So I've been sharing my story, but with that, there's some heaviness, because a lot of stuff comes back up. And sometimes I re-trigger myself with, you know, the guilt that went along with, you know, and I see us now and the relationship we have now, and I'm like, how could I have ever thought those things? But, you know, realizing, as you and I are both on the same wavelength with that, it's so important to share those things in order to, you know, shed light on it for other individuals who are dealing with the same thing. Like, it's almost like our obligation. We're like obligated to do that. And I love that you're on the same wavelength as this platform here with her version.
Yeah.
And I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love what you're doing. I mean, it's fantastic. I love it. I love being in the presence of other women that are just all very passionate about storytelling and just supporting women. That's what it's
Yeah.
all about.
Yeah. 100%. Any closing thoughts before I close up?
You know, just to when it comes to moms, if you're a mom listening, and you know a mom who's pregnant or just has had a newborn or just another mom, just be honest about your thoughts about the challenges of motherhood, and that because there are challenges and because you might think a certain thing doesn't make you a bad mom, it makes you human, and that's okay. Like it's okay.
Yes. Yes. Is your social media on your website? People want to get
It
contact with
is.
you. Okay, very
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
anyone who resonated, we still have quite a few of you hanging out here, going up to an hour. So I so appreciate you being here, supporting us. Jennifer's story and the Her Version platform. Anyone who does resonate with her story wants to contact her. Her website, along with the 2 podcasts that she runs, and her social media is on there. I want to thank you, Jennifer, for taking some time out of your day to hang out with us. For those of you watching on the replay, make sure you hashtag replay wherever you are so we know that you were here and you were listening, and we can send you some love. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you follow, like, and share. If you have an amazing story to share of a struggle to a triumph, make sure you reach out to me or at herversion.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth and inspire others. Until next time.